One of the more common and semi-annoying NIFs of HO scale model railroading is that MTH Protosound 3 engines do not play nice with DCC, and they also do not play nice with other DCC only engines, since MTH uses their own proprietary DCS system. But what not a lot of people realize, and this has been the case pretty much since day one, is that you can run MTH Protosound 3 engines on DCC. Now, initially, when they first came out in 2006, they only had pretty much just the address CVs and maybe 3 or 4 others that you could adjust. The number of CVs that you can change has grown over the years. They're really still not there on what they should be as far as customizing the engine, but they are getting there. And one of the things that you can do, and I'm going to show you how here, is to consist them with other DCC only engines. So what I tend to do in terms of freight diesels is I kind of have what I call a fleet strategy, where basically I will make every single diesel that I have that's a modern freight engine run a top speed of 70 miles an hour, and at half throttle I want it to run 35, and at speed step 1 I want it running somewhere between about 0.8 and maybe like 1.3 scale miles an hour. So how I do that is with my AccuTrack speedometer, and just go through CV 5, 6, and 2. Doesn't take a whole lot of time with one of those to do that. So these engines are straight out of the box. They haven't even put an address on them. No CV programming has been done whatsoever. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up the Bush engine here with kind of my fleet strategy being, you know, top speed of 70 miles an hour, and then kind of halfway 35, and then, you know, speed step 1 about 1 mile an hour. You're never going to get them exact. There's always going to be a little bit of pushing and pulling there, but it's not extreme, and if you have a good load of cars on them, it actually even more minimizes that, so it's really not too much of an issue, and the real ones kind of do that too a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is set the speeds up on this one, and then we're going to go over the MTH on how to set up that one and go through the different types of speed matching and kind of set it up to run the same kind of speeds that I want. Because out of the box, it's set up for the DCS system, which on that HO system that's back there, on the back shelf there, on that they actually do run scale miles an hour. So if you turn that to 1, it should run 1 scale mile an hour and so forth, but it's a completely different system than DCC, and, you know, running this at half throttle will probably be significantly slower or faster than 35 miles an hour. So, and that's just because, you know, they don't set it that way for DCC. So we're going to go over all that now. So working with the Bush engine here, we're going to turn it to speed step 1. And we should see a scale speed of around 1 mile an hour. So I've set CV2 to, I believe, a value of 1 for this one. And then CV5, I think, is at 150, 140 something. CV6, I think, is like 72. So we're seeing 1 scale mile an hour there, so that's good. We'll turn it up to full blast. And it should fly by next right at about 70 miles an hour. Close enough. Next we'll do a half throttle test, and it should come by right at about 35. So we got it right where we want it. So next we're going to do a baseline here on the Hybrid Gevo, just to see how far off it is. So we're moving along at speed step 1. So, pretty close there. I think the other one was like, what, 1.1 mile an hour? So, if we were just running at a crawl speed, I wouldn't really need to change anything. So, we'll go to full throttle. We'll probably see a top speed of 80 or better, which is a bit too fast. Also, another thing to keep in mind when you're doing this, you do want to warm them up for about 10 minutes. Yeah, so way too fast. We'll go to half throttle. Way too fast. So when you're doing this, it's best to do it on a flat surface. Even a small oval of track will work just fine. You do want to kind of make sure it's flat though also. You don't want to give yourself artificial numbers from going uphill or downhill. That would definitely throw off your speed. Also best to do it without a load on the train, just to keep everything neutral and consistent. Like I said, run them for about 10 minutes. I'd say about 3/4 throttle for about 10 minutes in each direction. That should warm the engine up. Because when you first get it out, the first couple laps around won't be as fast, and then it kind of warms up a little bit, and it will start to pick up a little bit of speed. So you don't want to do any of this when it's not going to be accurate. So next we're going to take a look at how to actually change the speeds on the MTH. So to kind of unlock the potential of changing speed on an MTH engine, the very first thing that you have to do is go into your command system or throttle, whatever it may be. MTH engines will only work if they're being programmed on a main. You cannot use a programming track. Will not work. So the very first value that you want to change is something called Pwm Mode. No idea what that stands for. It doesn't matter, but that's what you need to change. Which is CV52. So CV52, it's kind of either a 0 or a 1. And to enable it, you want to set a value of 1, because out of the box it's set to 0. So we'll go ahead and do that. You'll get a little horn blast acknowledging that it took the CV change. The next thing is to disable any kind of momentum and acceleration and braking. So CV3, set to 0, CV4, set to 0. So, with some trial and error, what we'll want to do next is set the top speed, which is going to be CV5. Out of the box, I'm not really sure what this is set to. I'm going to trim it down a little bit. 255 would be the max. So we're going to set it to 225 and see where we're at. So we're at 225 there. Let's crank it up full blast. And we'll kind of see where we fall in here. Again, before doing this, make sure the engine's kind of good and warm. Otherwise, you'll get inconsistent performance. 76 there, so we'll need to trim back a little bit. We'll go to, let's say, 210. 72 mile an hour. We'll trim off a little more. Let's go to 205. .71. Let's trim off 2 more. Gives it 203. Should be pretty close to 70 mile an hour here. .71. We'll see how it does on the next lap. .70. Pretty good. So we'll stick with 203 there. So next, we will want to check our half throttle value. And with any luck, it should be right around 35 miles an hour. If not, we'll have to change the speed curve. I'm not sure how MTH has it set up, whether it's linear or progressive. .37. That's pretty close. Again, we don't have CV6 to work with to dial that in, so the only other way that you can change it is by changing the whole entire speed curve. Which in the manual, so you have to set CV29 appropriately, and then we would probably choose like value number 2 there. We'll see if we need to do that. See how it does here. .37 again. Slightly fast. We'll give it another shot here. This may be as close as we can get. Adjusting with the speed curve may actually throw things off a little more. .37 again. Just out of curiosity, we'll see where we're at in reverse. .36. And in this consist, this actually is going to be running in reverse. You will notice with a lot of locomotives there is a variance between forward and reverse, generally with lower quality engines that have lower quality motors. Things such as Athearn Genesis. I know what you're thinking, Athearn Genesis, well, that's almost $300 a model. How can they possibly have low quality motors in them? Well, they do. And there is quite a bit of variance on an Ace versus forward or backwards as far as speed. .36. So I'm not really gonna freak out too much about 1 mile per hour. It actually makes things a little easier on us that we don't have to change anything else. So next we're gonna check and see where we're at with CV2, which is basically our crawl speed or speed step number 1. And we're looking for that right about 1 mile per hour. Now I had to play around with CV2 a little bit. Came out to a value of about 16 for CV2. Lower values, the engine wouldn't move at all. Faster than 6 or higher than 16, the engine would be a little bit too fast through here. So 1.3 mile an hour. I think our Genesis was like 1.1. Close enough. So next step, and possibly the hardest part of the process, because we got pretty lucky with the speed curve there, it didn't really take more than 2 or 3 CVs to dial that in, is going to be the function mapping. And some things that I need to change, just because I kind of have, again, sort of a fleet strategy, in which typically I always keep F0 as the headlight, F1 as the bell, F2 as the horn, F3 could be short horn or coupler clank, F4 I always use as dynamic brakes, F5 I typically use as number boards or ditch lights, with F5 and F6. F7 I generally don't utilize too much. Sometimes that can be a dimmer setting, or a grade crossing horn I'll sometimes throw in with F7. F8 I always like to use as the mute. F9 and F10 I prefer to use as RPM up, RPM down. If it's an ESU engine, F9 and F10 I don't really mess with those, just because of drive hold. You can really only use drive hold with other ESU engines. If I'm using an ESU engine and a non-ESU engine, I don't use F9 and F10. F11 I typically keep as radiator fans, and F12 I usually use as cab chatter. Beyond those, I don't really use too many functions at all. So I mean, there's other functions in there. Sometimes they'll have like 20 different functions, but CV21 and 22 are only really for use with F1 through F12. And in a consist, those are kind of the only ones that I'm using. So next we're going to take a look at the function mapping on this one, and trying to get it to some type of, at least close to what I normally use. And that's probably going to be the hardest part of this process. So now we are ready to program on remap our functions on here. And kind of how this works is CV, it's 115 through 170. What you reprogram is what's called the low byte value. I'm not really sure what the high byte value is for, but we're going to go down through and do the low byte value. So F0 is already set up for headlight, F1 is good for the bell, F2 is already set up for the horn, F3 I do not want startup shutdown. For F3 I want to go with, say, a short horn to match Tsunami here. So a short horn is value of 18, so we would program CV120, which is the low byte value for function 3, to match this here, which is that value of 18. F4 I typically use as dynamic brake. I do not want passenger freight announcements. That's CV122. We would set to brake sounds, value of 2. F5's already working with lights, don't need to mess with that. Now F6 typically I use for ditch lights. F5 I usually use for number boards. F5 on this engine is controlling the charging lights and also the number boards. You could change it if you wanted to, but I don't really need to. But I don't really have anything that I want to use F6 for on this engine, because typically on other engines that would be for turning on the ditch lights. So I kind of need to pick a useless value to pick in here that isn't going to do anything. So one that I found for that, so for CV6 here, this is low byte value CV126. I set to marker lights 43. This train has no marker light, so it won't do anything. F7 CV128. Typically F7 set up for the grade crossing horn, so that'd be a value of 10. F8, and I was kind of concerned that I wouldn't be able to do this, but it looks like it's going to work. F8 I typically use as the mute. There's nothing that's identified here specifically as mute, but for that CV130, engine sounds, so a value of 8 there. For 9, which I typically use to rev up, That should be CV132 here. Rev up, value of 36. F10, the low byte CV134. Rev down, C30, value of 35 there. F11, I typically use Radiator Fans. Well, there's no function in here for Radiator Fans. Nothing that I really want to use on that function, so again, I'm going to pick kind of this useless marker lights value. So 43 there. And then F12 I typically use for cab chatter. So CV138 there. Cab chatter, value of 3. F13, can't use it in the consist, but I want to keep it on the engine, just because it's typically up on F6 and that function isn't really being used here. So I'm going to put it on F13, since we don't need to worry about smoke. So the low byte CV is 140, and I'm going to choose master volume 17 here, so I can use F13 to kind of cycle through the volume, and we'll do that a little bit here. So you can kind of use that to turn it up or down. So now we're going to do a function test here and verify that all these things actually work. So, headlight. Yep, looks good there. Our E-bell. Horn. Oop. We forgot to set F3. F3 is still set to the shutdown. So we wanted to do a short horn on F3, but that's no problem. I can still reset that. So F3, low byte value of 120. And for the short horn, that is 18. So let's test it. F3 again. So now that's doing what it's supposed to. F4 brake sounds. Doesn't really do a whole lot. F5 is our lights. F6 again is a dead function because I use that for ditch lights typically on others. I would love to be able to actually trigger the ditch lights to stay on. Unfortunately, I'd probably have to rewire the engine to do that, which I might do. F7 should be the grade crossing. F8 is now basically the mute. F9, rev up. And F10 to rev back down. F11 is kind of a dead function again, because I use that for radiator fans on other engines. F12 is our cab chatter. And F12 will toggle off the cab chatter, and then of course I have F13 set up for my volume function. So now we're going to go ahead and program CV19, CV21, and CV22, and then these should be pretty well matched up. Okay, so the very last thing I did was set up CV19, CV21, and CV22. CV19 is the consist address. So I just picked a number of 41. So on the leader here, you choose 41 for that CV. On the rear unit, because it's a rear pushing unit, you just add 128, so its value was 169. I just go on to, if you type in the Google CV29 calculator, it'll take you to a Digitrax page, which I use for the calculation of CV21 and 22. And basically for the first unit, I chose to use F0, F1, F2, F3, F4, F5, not using F6. F7 is my grade crossing, so I'm using that one, and F8 for mute. That produces all the values for CV21 in that chart. For F9 and F10, I'm using those for RPM up and down. F11 I'm not using, and F12 for cab chatter. And then that gives you the values for CV22. And then pretty much on the trailing unit, which is the MTH, not using F1 or F2, not using F3. I have it set for F4 for brakes. F5 of course for lights. Not using F6, not using F7. F8 I am using. Then F9 and F10 I am using to do the RPM up and down. And that's kind of it. So that'll give you your CV21 and 22 values for the trailing unit. So let's fire them up here. So Tsunami will turn on with track power. Kind of a good way of getting the MTH to turn on also. Just give it a little quick throttle there, and it'll power up. So you've got them both on. Horn only out of the leader. Bell only out of the leader. F5 here. You can see the lights that die on both of them there. Got our grade crossing, which is on F7. F8, mute. Now this is really cool. On F9, it actually notches up on both of them. Then of course on F10 you can go back down. Then F12, cab chatter, which I don't really have the volume turned up on that now. So let's take a look at it run. So we'll start out at a crawl here. And you can see that they're playing pretty nice here. No real pushing or pulling. What you really want to take a look at is in here. You can see it's very smooth. Not really jumping all around there. We'll give it a little bit of speed here. You can see they're running really smooth. So there you go. They said it couldn't be done. But you definitely can consist at least this new batch of MTH engines that has all of these same CVs. I don't really have any older ones to compare, but I would assume that if it gives you the ability to use 19, 21, 22, if it has the ability to use that CV52 for Pwm mode, where you can adjust your speed curves and the actual top speed of the engine and its crawl speed, kill the momentum on the engine. If you have the ability to use those CVs, there should be no reason you shouldn't be able to do this. As far as the functions, I'm not sure if that's something that's in older MTH engines or if that's something that's a new feature. Taking a look through the catalog, the newest MTH catalog, the only real note that I see here is that it pretty much says that you can do advanced consisting, feature mapping, and speed mapping, which is what we did. I would assume that you can also update older locomotives to have that ability. That's actually kind of something I'm working on with an older MTH steam locomotive, and when I have more on that, I will definitely share and make a video on it. But for now, looks like moving forward with MTH engines that are coming out, you should be able to do all these things. And with everything that you have here, I mean, you can definitely make a pretty cool consist. And the nice thing is that when I break up this consist, you know, as soon as I turn CV19 to 0, the speeds are already set. As far as programming CV21 and 22, you can just go to a website and it tells you the values that you want there. So literally I can change 3 CVs and I can consist either of these engines with any of the other ones that are in my fleet. So, I mean, it doesn't really take them any more time. And the amount of work that I put into programming this one is really no more than what I did on the MTH one. It's just a little bit quicker because I have, you know, a graphical user interface in Decoder Pro in order to program the Tsunami 2. I mean, I could do it the long way, but that would probably even take even more time than what I spent on the MTH engine just doing that function mapping. So there you have it. Sorry to be long-winded in this one, but, you know, these details must be covered in order to try to give an overview of what you need to do. So I hope this helps, and I hope this can serve as a guide. And, you know, for any MTH engines that you're getting in the future, don't be afraid. At least with the new batch of them, you know, it seems like you have the abilities that you need to use, really. So that's it for this one. Thanks for tuning in.